Have you ever had something in your life where you just kind of look and think for a moment, what just happened? And then you have to figure out your way ahead. Well, a disaster does that to a community and community leadership, where something happens and then they have to figure out what just happened and how do we figure out what we need to do to make the best steps forward. I think sometimes people have this idea that there's this clear way to say, oh, this happened, now do this. There has to be that analysis of what happened and what needs to happen now to respond to it. And it takes a moment to figure some things out.
I can tell you, it's 2025 now. We still have cases open from the 2010 Middle Tennessee flood. There are still cases open around Hurricane Katrina that happened in 2005. Recovery is different for every survivor, and it's just important that we treat all survivors with respect and understand that it's a journey for the individual survivor, but also for the community to walk through.
I don't know where to start.
Maybe just start with the day of the flood. What was going on?
Okay. Day of the flood was a Saturday morning, and I was enjoying my coffee, just sitting around the house, and it was raining and what have you, and it was wet out and had been raining all night, and didn't think much of it. And then somebody pounded on my door and said, you need to get out, evacuate now. And I said, my house doesn't flood, it's never flooded. And they said, no, you need to get out now, there's a wall of water coming. I said, oh.
Here I go by nickname, is what I do. It's Buddy. So B-U-D-D-Y, Frazier, F-R-A-Z-I-E-R. So in 2010, when we received our first disaster declaration, that was for flooding. So we basically had to learn the FEMA process. And then our second one was a result of a windstorm in 2019. And then the third disaster declaration was the flood of August 21st, 2021. And that was, the worst of all of them. And we're still dealing with that one today.
Waverly it was so fast. Rain had been falling days before, saturated the ground, and then all of a sudden there was just so much rain in Waverly, and 11 minutes is what it took for that flash flood to happen.
There's so much organization that has to be put in place quickly. After the flood, TEMA formed the first statewide flood task force. We had monthly meetings with all the state agencies, federal agencies, and nonprofits.
So when we look at how the local government, state government, and the federal government work, really that local government is in charge of what happens within their municipality, right? So they are the ones that are leading the disaster and the recovery. We take our cues from them. When they say we need help, then the state is there to support them in whatever they need. And then when the state's resources start running thin, that's when we reach to our federal partners at FEMA and the federal government. The local government leads that charge, and the state and federal governments are just there in that supporting mechanism.
I didn't think I would ever see the day when the National Guard had to be activated in Waverly, Tennessee, but the National Guard was activated, and they played a major role in debris removal. And what I was told by TEMA officials early on was, the quicker we can get this debris removed, the quicker the community will start to heal. The Tennessee Department of Transportation was a big asset in removing debris with their equipment along with the National Guard. And at one time I didn't think we would ever see the end of the debris, but 9 months later we finally got to that point.
The floods, we had known the rain was coming. We knew that there was going to be a multi-day weather event. We were activated at the Emergency Operations Center, which is kind of the hub for state government and other partners that can come in to track the needs, but you're just never prepared for that. The creeks rising, creek flooding was a huge issue in the 22 floods in eastern Kentucky.
In disaster and in emergency management, we say there are functions of things that have to happen. So the first thing that happens is there's an incident. Something happens, a disaster occurs. And so the first phase is called the rescue or relief phase. It's that immediate response. We're going to save life, we're going to save property. And then we move into a response phase where we need to now stabilize life. And so in response, that's where you'll see the feeding operations, the sheltering of people. Then we go into a short-term recovery phase that will now be cleaning up after the disaster. Long-term recovery is that for the long haul. We're going to fix homes, we're going to repair, rebuild, we're going to rebuild communities.
Housing is so important in recovery because, I mean, that is where people live, where they feel like they're part of a community, where they're safe. These events continue to happen. People need to get out of harm's way. And so finding housing options for them is just important. If homes are destroyed and not rebuilt or repaired, people will leave those communities and those communities will die out. We work for resilient building, making sure that those houses are built up. We're thinking about the materials that we use, how we install roofs and siding and foundations to, again, help people be able to weather the storms that come. The other thing we're doing as we rebuild following the 22 floods is our High Ground project. We have looked for land opportunities that are up high. So we have 8 high ground communities, some small, some large, and that is just our goal to make that available to people.
One of the interesting phrases to me that I hear all the time is that each disaster is its own disaster. So even though we may see similar causes of disaster, a fire, a tornado, a hurricane, a flood, the way that it impacts could be different. And so that's where we kind of use our experiences and our knowledge, but yet we've got to look at what has happened in this particular disaster. What are the particular communities that have been impacted by this disaster? And then how do we work with our partners to determine the best solutions?
So this is a day in life of Meg. We're putting these on our temporary housing units so people know that this is not ASP's permanent response to the disaster, but that these are just units to house people while we repair and replace their homes. The people that build the trailers for the temporary units had a staff build day where they put together like little love buckets. So each home will get kind of household items that were lost in the flood, anything from paper towels and Clorox wipes to soap, a little trash can, silverware, anything that they're going to need when they get in their new temporary unit. There was a lot of coverage for Helene when it happened, but actually going into the zones where it had happened, you felt like you had entered a war zone. Like the landscape was gone. Rivers that used to be somewhere were now in a different area. Boulders that weren't in rivers before were now in rivers. There were just trees down everywhere. I was naive, and I thought, and I think the majority of people think, that if you have homeowners insurance, it covers whatever's going to happen in a disaster. What I've learned is it doesn't. We've had landslides, we've had floods in non-flood zones, we've had so much devastation that wasn't covered by insurance. It's really left homeowners in a horrible position because they have these mortgages and they aren't able to pay off their homes, but their homes no longer exist, and we have to find a way to take care of them.
So ASP has been involved in disaster recovery since 2012. We've dealt with floods, we've dealt with fires, tornadoes, and now hurricanes. And each disaster is unique, and the needs of the community are unique. ASP has partnered with Lowe's to provide temporary housing units for families that were affected by the hurricane.
So a temporary housing unit is a new concept that it's one of those, we're building the airplane as we're flying it, but it was the concept that these mountain folks don't want to leave their land. And so how do we keep them on their land while we repair and replace it? So these are what the temporary housing units look like. They are very tiny, but they are dignified. They look like a home. They have a choice between having one full-size bed or a bunk bed option with 2 full-size beds if it's like a mom and a kid. They also have a small kitchenette with a refrigerator and a 2-burner stove. And then on this end of the house, there is a shower and a commode. So they have everything they need, and it should carry them for the next 6 to 12 months.
When we use the word disaster, like we think big, we think hurricanes and floods and fires, but somebody could have a personal disaster that day, right? So how do people show up for one another in communities? And you see it all the time, whether it's, somebody starts a GoFundMe for, a cancer patient that they know, or somebody is bringing foods, meal trains to people. Like, we're doing this in every day, but we see it most particularly after disaster, right? So we see how communities come together to love on one another. We see mayors that have been through disasters picking up the phone, calling mayors that they may not know, or county officials that they may not know, just to say, hey friend, I've been where you are, it's gonna be okay. To be that in an everyday, to walk that every single day is so important, not only in disaster, but in everyday life. We never know what somebody is facing, so if we have that opportunity, we take it.
Think for a moment of a disaster impacting a home, sometimes unexpected and unknown, but that disaster becomes a very dark spot. Literally could be very dark because of the storm clouds that have come. But what people need in that darkest moment that they may have experienced in their lives is a glimmer of light, a glimmer of hope, that out of this chaos, out of this dark spot, light will shine.
Being a shining light in the wake of a disaster actually does not take a whole lot of additional effort, because families who have been through disaster have a lot of emotional trauma happening. So a smile, a hug, presence can go a really long way in shining the love of God from yourself to somebody else. And it turns out that that's all it takes, period. That even if there's not a disaster, you never know what someone's walking around with, and presence, a hug, a smile might be able to go a long way.